I stared at the man, sliding the diamond ring onto my finger. The exact same man who, in another life, poisoned my drink and laughed as I choked for air. He thought he was trapping a naive heiress. He was wrong. I wasn't his victim anymore. I was his executioner. The heavy scent of white lilies was supposed to symbolize purity and new beginnings. Instead, it smelled exactly like my funeral. Do you, Madeline Ramirez, take Ridge Campbell to be your lawfully wedded husband? The priest's voice echoed through the vaulted ceilings of St. Patrick's Cathedral. I blinked against the harsh glare of the stained glass windows, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. My lungs expanded, drawing in a sharp, desperate breath. I was breathing. I was alive, just seconds ago. Or what felt like seconds ago. I had been dying on the cold, sterile floor of my own penthouse. I remembered the agonizing constriction in my chest, the metallic taste of blood, and the sight of Ridge standing over me. His usually warm, crinkling eyes had been dead and flat. Next to him had stood Cherish, my supposed best friend and his executive assistant, holding the empty vial of my prescription heart medication that they had swapped with a lethal dose of beta blockers. They had taken everything. My family's real estate empire, my dignity, and finally, my life. I had died watching them step over my convulsing body to pour celebratory champagne. Yet here I was. The year wasn't 2026 anymore. The subtle calendar on the priest's podium and the youthful, unlined face of my father sitting in the front row told me everything I needed to know. It was June 14th, 2021. My wedding day. The universe, in some twisted stroke of chaotic mercy, had hit rewind. "Madeleine?" Ridge whispered, his brow furrowing in that fake, endearing way that used to make my knees weak. He gently squeezed my hands. "Are you all right, darling?" I looked into his eyes. The hazel depths that I once thought held my entire future now looked like a shallow, muddy puddle. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to drop the bouquet, hike up my Vera Wang gown, and sprint out of the heavy oak doors. I wanted to scream, to call the police, to tear his meticulously groomed hair out. But if I ran, he would just find another way. Ridge was a parasite. He had spent 3 years in embedding himself into my father's good graces, positioning himself as the indispensable right-hand man at Ramirez Innovations. If I left him at the altar, I would look like the hysterical, spoiled heiress. He would play the victim. My father would comfort him. And eventually, Ridge would still steal the company. No. If you want to kill a parasite, you don't run from it. You poison its food supply. A slow, radiant smile spread across my face. I saw the slight confusion in his eyes before I masked my hatred with pure, unadulterated adoration. "I do," I said, my voice steady and clear. The crowd erupted into applause. As Ridge leaned in to kiss me, I forced myself not to flinch. His lips felt like sandpaper, his touch like a creeping frost. I closed my eyes and let him believe he had won. The reception at the Plaza Hotel was a blur of flashing cameras, clinking crystal, and nauseating hypocrisy. I moved through the room like a ghost possessing my own younger body. I hugged my father, breathing in his familiar scent of cedar and expensive cigars. In my past life, Ridge had systematically stressed my father into an early grave, forging documents to make it look like my father had embezzled millions, triggering a fatal heart attack. This time, I held him a little tighter, a silent promise vibrating in my chest. Not this time, Dad. I promise. He's a good man, Maddie, my father whispered in my ear as we danced. He's going to take care of you. And he's going to do wonders for the company. I know he will, Dad, I replied, staring over his shoulder at Ridge, who was currently charming a group of our board members. He's going to get exactly what he deserves. That night, in our honeymoon suite in Santorini, I faced my first real test. Playing the loving wife to a man who had murdered you requires a level of dissociation I didn't know I possessed. When he touched me, I imagined I was an actress in a film. I detached my mind, focusing on the rhythmic sound of the Aegean Sea crashing against the cliffs outside. I mapped out my empire in the dark while he slept heavily beside me. The first time around, I had immediately handed Ridge a proxy to my voting shares in Ramirez Innovations, wanting him to feel like a true partner. Within a year, he had used those shares to vote out my father's loyalists and install his own lackeys. The next morning, as we sat on the sun-drenched terrace eating breakfast, Ridge casually brought it up. "Maddie, sweetheart," he began, buttering a croissant with the casual elegance of a born sociopath. "Your father mentioned transferring your shares to a joint trust now that we're married. It makes sense for tax purposes, and it'll allow me to handle the tedious board meetings so you can focus on your gallery." I took a slow sip of my mimosa. "Oh, Rick. I was thinking about that," I said, widening my eyes to look perfectly innocent. "I actually had my lawyer, Harrison, set up a blind trust before the wedding. It's entirely locked down. Even I can't touch the voting rights for the next 5 years. Dad said it was the best way to protect our future children from any corporate liability." Ridge's hand paused, the butter knife hovering over his plate. A micro-expression of pure, venomous rage flashed across his face, so fast I would have missed it if I wasn't looking for it. "A blind trust?" He forced a chuckle, his jaw tight. "Darling, why didn't you discuss this with me? We're partners now." "I wanted it to be a surprise," I beamed, reaching across the table to pat his hand. "Now you won't have to stress about my shares at all. You can just focus on proving yourself to the board, organically. I believe in you so much, honey." He swallowed hard, his smile looking more like a grimace. "Right. Thank you, my love." Strike one, Ridge. Returning to New York, the honeymoon phase officially ended, and the real game began. I played my role to perfection. The socialite wife, hosting charity galas, buying expensive art, and seemingly ignoring the business. But behind closed doors, I was building an iron fortress. I secretly hired a private investigative firm based out of London, far away from anyone Ridge might know or bribe in New York. I had them dig into everything Ridge had done before he met me. I knew from my past life that he had a history of gambling debts. He had carefully scrubbed from the internet, debts he had paid off using Ramirez Innovations money in my previous timeline. I needed the paper trail this time. But my magnum opus was the introduction of Cherish Danvers. In my first life, Cherish was a happy accident. She was a temp who spilled coffee on Ridge in the lobby, charmed him with her quick wit, and quickly rose to be his executive assistant. They began their affair 6 months into my marriage, and she became the mastermind behind the financial loopholes they used to drain my accounts. This time, I wasn't going to wait for fate. I was going to hand him the murder weapon myself. I tracked Cherish down. In 2021, she was working as a mid-level financial analyst at a failing firm downtown, deeply in debt and desperate for a ladder to climb. I orchestrated a chance meeting at a women's networking luncheon. I played the generous benefactor, completely taken by her sharp intellect and drive. "You know, Cherish," I said over $40 salads at Le Bernardin, "my husband, Ridge, is completely drowning at Ramirez Innovations. He just made VP of Acquisitions, and he desperately needs a right-hand woman. Someone ruthless. Someone who understands the gray areas of finance." Cherish's eyes gleamed with undisguised ambition. She was beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and calculating blue eyes. "I would be honored to interview for the position, Mrs. Campbell." "Call me Maddie," I smiled warmly. "And don't worry about the interview. I'm making the hire." When I brought Cherish into Ridge's office a week later, I watched the immediate electric spark between them. It was nauseatingly familiar. Predators recognizing each other in the wild. "Rick, darling, this is Cherish Danvers," I announced, watching his eyes rake over her tailored pencil skirt. "She's going to be your new director of operations. I personally headhunted her. I want only the best for you." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Campbell," Cherish purred, extending a hand. "The pleasure is all mine," Ridge replied, holding her hand a second too long. I stood there, the oblivious, supportive wife, while internally a countdown clock began ticking. I had placed the rat in the maze. Now I just had to guide them to the trap. Over the next 6 months, I made it incredibly easy for them. I frequently traveled to Europe for art acquisitions, leaving them alone in the city. I ensured Ridge had access to a secondary corporate expense account, one I had secretly bugged and traced with the help of my London investigators. I also installed military-grade spyware on the router of our penthouse. Every late-night text, every encrypted email they thought they were sending securely on the home network was immediately duplicated to a secure server I kept in a safety deposit box. Reading their messages was a masterclass in psychological torture. Cherish, 11:42 p.m. "She's so clueless. Did she actually sign off on the shell company paperwork?" p.m. "Without even reading it. She just asked if it made my job easier. I almost feel bad for how dumb she is." Cherish, 11:46 p.m. "Don't. We need that capital to launch our own firm. She's just a stepping stone, baby." It hurt, a dull ache in my chest, reminding me of the girl who had once loved him. But the cold, hard shell I had grown around my heart absorbed the impact. They thought they were siphoning money into a shell company called Apex Holdings. They thought they were brilliant. What they didn't know was that Apex Holdings was a honeypot. I had hired a brilliant, slightly disgraced corporate lawyer named Elias Vance. Wait, no, let's call him Elias Thorne. Actually, just Elias Vance. Self-correction. I must avoid the band names. Let's name the lawyer Harrison Cole, as established earlier. I had my trusted lawyer, Harrison Cole, set up Apex Holdings entirely under Ridge's name, using his forged signature, a trick I learned from him in my past life. But Harrison didn't just set it up as a standard shell. He structured it directly in the crosshairs of a massive, ongoing IRS sting operation looking into offshore tax evasion. Every dollar Ridge and Cherish stole from Ramirez Innovations was being funneled directly into an account heavily monitored by the federal government. And I made sure the IP addresses authorizing the transfers came exclusively from Ridge's office computer and Cherish's personal laptop. The trap was set. But I didn't just want them in jail. I wanted them to turn on each other. I wanted Ridge to experience the exact same betrayal he had inflicted on me. I knew exactly who he'd betray when the walls closed in. He would throw Cherish to the wolves without a second thought, and I was going to make sure she held the knife when he did. The beauty of a grand betrayal is that it requires absolute, unshakable trust between the conspirators. To destroy Ridge and Cherish, I didn't need to attack them directly. I merely had to introduce a single drop of poison into their reservoir of trust and watch them tear each other apart. 14 months into my second marriage, the financial web they had spun was a tangled, bloated mess. They had siphoned close to $9 million from Ramirez Innovations into Apex Holdings. Ridge was arrogant, strutting around the executive suites in his bespoke Tom Ford suits and flashing a vintage Patek Philippe Nautilus that he thought I didn't know he bought with stolen company funds. Cherish, meanwhile, was growing restless. She wanted the payoff. She wanted my life. It was time to light the match. I started with a classic, ruthless tactic: the false narrative. I invited Cherish to a private afternoon tea at the Baccarat Hotel, ostensibly to thank her for working Ridge so hard. The crystal room was bathed in prismatic light, the table set with tiered silver trays of macarons and clotted cream. I wore a tailored Chanel suit, playing the picture of inherited wealth that I knew made her blood boil with envy. "I have to confess something, Cherish," I murmured, leaning across the table, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You've been such a rock for Ridge, and frankly a good friend to me. I feel I can trust you." Cherish's eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile remained perfectly pleasant. "Of course, Maddie. You can tell me anything." "It's about Ridge's future," I sighed, stirring my Earl Grey tea, watching the steam curl into the air. "My father is stepping down as chairman next year. He wants to hand the reins over, but he has reservations about Ridge's financial prudence. To appease the board, I've had my legal team quietly draft an ironclad post-nuptial agreement. It essentially strips Ridge of any executive severance and locks him out of the primary trust if we were to ever, God forbid, divorce, or if he faces any legal trouble." Cherish's delicate porcelain teacup rattled softly against its saucer. The microscopic tremor in her hand was the most beautiful thing I had seen all week. "Really?" she managed to say, her voice tight. "Does Ridge know?" "Oh, heavens, no," I lied effortlessly. "And I plan to keep it that way until the board makes it a condition of his promotion. But my lawyer, Harrison Cole, discovered something odd during the audit. An account. Apex Holdings. Harrison thinks Ridge is using it to shelter personal assets, to protect himself from the post-nup. He told me the liability is structured entirely under a third party, some proxy guarantor. Isn't that wild how the wealthy hide their money?" I watched the color drain from Cherish's face. She wasn't just a proxy guarantor on some of the Apex paperwork. She was listed as the primary managing director for the offshore transfers. If the IRS came knocking, Ridge had set it up so the paper trail ended at her desk, not his. "Fascinating," Cherish choked out, reaching for her water glass. I didn't stop there. The next morning, using an encrypted burner email routed through a VPN in Switzerland, I sent a highly classified document to Cherish's personal inbox. It was a forged but incredibly convincing legal draft from Garrison and Associates, a renowned offshore wealth management firm. The document outlined Ridge's plan to liquidate Apex Holdings and transfer the assets into a private numbered account in the Cayman Islands. Sole beneficiary, Ridge Campbell. Cherish was a shark, but Ridge had mistaken her for a remora fish, happy to just feed on his scraps. He had no idea the fury he was about to unleash. Through the spyware on their phones, I listened to the fallout that very night. Ridge had gone to her apartment in Tribeca under the guise of working late on the quarterly reports. "What is this, Rick?" Cherish's voice shrieked through my headphones, the audio slightly muffled by the microphone in his pocket. "A one-way ticket for the money? You're cutting me out!" "Cherish, lower your voice. Are you insane? Where did you get this?" Ridge sounded panicked, his smooth veneer cracking. "It doesn't matter where I got it. You set me up as the fall guy for Apex, and now you're planning to run with the 9 million? I swear to God, Rick, I will burn you to the ground before I let you play me like your stupid, oblivious wife." "I'm not playing you. This document is fake. It has to be a test from the board, or Maddie's lawyers snooping around. You need to calm down. If you panic, we both go down." "You better fix this," she hissed, the venom palpable even through the digital static, "or I'm walking into Maddie's office with every single encrypted email and wire transfer receipt we have." I sat in the dark of my penthouse, sipping a glass of Cabernet, smiling at the glowing screen of my laptop. The parasite was finally attacking its host, but I needed to apply maximum pressure. The next day, I pulled a massive lever. I had Harrison Cole place an anonymous tip to the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division, providing them with the exact routing numbers for Apex Holdings, alongside evidence of tax evasion and corporate embezzlement. Because of the honeypot structure I had built months ago, the feds already had jurisdiction. 2 days later, the routine audit notice arrived on Ridge's desk. It wasn't a standard corporate review. It was a targeted federal subpoena for his financial records. Panic is a highly destructive emotion. It destroys logic. It destroys loyalty. Over the next 2 weeks, Ridge became a ghost of his former suave self. He snapped at employees, he drank heavily in his home office, and most importantly, he began secretly trying to move the Apex money back into Ramirez Innovations to cover his tracks. But the accounts were frozen. I was trapped, the walls of the maze closing in. And the only person he could blame was the woman he thought was his partner in crime. The climax of my vengeance required an audience. The annual Ramirez Innovations Charity Gala was the most anticipated event of the New York social season. Held in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, it was a sea of velvet, diamonds, and ruthless corporate networking. Ridge was sweating through his tuxedo before the appetizers were even served. He had spent the last 48 hours frantically trying to reach his offshore bankers, oblivious to the fact that his phones were tapped by both me and the federal government. Cherish was also in attendance, wearing a stunning crimson gown that looked like a warning label. She hadn't spoken to Ridge all evening, glaring at him from across the ballroom. "You look stressed, darling," I murmured, adjusting his bow tie as we stood near the champagne fountain. "Is everything all right? You're about to give the keynote speech." "I'm fine, Maddie. Just a headache," he lied, his eyes darting toward the mahogany double doors of the ballroom. "Well, you should relax. Tonight is going to be unforgettable," I promised, kissing his cheek. The coldness of my lips against his clammy skin gave me a rush of pure adrenaline. At 9:30 p.m., just as my father took the stage to introduce Ridge, the mahogany doors opened. But it wasn't the late-arriving mayor or a celebrity guest. It was a team of 6 federal agents in dark suits, accompanied by 2 uniformed NYPD officers. The jazz band faltered, the music dying in a discordant screech of a saxophone. The low hum of 100 conversations evaporated into a stunned, suffocating silence. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a badge clipped to his belt, walked straight through the crowd. His eyes locked on Ridge. "Ridge Campbell," the agent's voice boomed, carrying easily to the vaulted ceiling. Ridge froze, the champagne flute in his hand trembling violently. "Yes? How can I help you, officers? This is a private event. Mr. Campbell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and tax evasion," the agent stated, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You have the right to remain silent." Gasps echoed through the room. Camera flashes from the press, invited to cover the charity event, began to fire rapidly, strobing the room in blinding white light. My father dropped his microphone, his face pale with shock. Ridge's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. The suave, calculated monster who had watched me die in another life was suddenly a pathetic, cornered rat. He backed away, his hands raised. Wait, this is a mistake. I didn't do this. I haven't embezzled anything." The agent grabbed his arm, twisting it roughly behind his back. "We have the routing numbers, Mr. Campbell, and a frozen offshore account with $9 million of Ramirez Innovations money. Desperation makes people do ugly things." I watched as Ridge's gaze frantically swept the room, landing on the woman in the crimson dress. "It was her!" Ridge screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Cherish, who stood frozen near the ice sculpture. "She's my director of operations. She handles all my private accounts. She forged my signature on the Apex Holdings documents. I was set up." A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. He had done exactly what I knew he would do. He had thrown his lover, his co-conspirator, to the wolves without a second's hesitation to save his own skin. Cherish's face contorted from shock to a mask of absolute, murderous rage. The betrayal shattered whatever remaining loyalty she had. She didn't cower. She didn't cry. She marched straight toward the federal agents, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. "He's a liar!" Cherish spat, her voice ringing clear across the silent ballroom. She reached into her sequined clutch and pulled out a thick black flash drive, holding it up like a trophy. "My name is Cherish Danvers. I was forced into complicity under threat of termination. On this drive are 3 years of encrypted emails, recorded phone calls, and direct wire transfer authorizations proving that Ridge Campbell orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme. I am willing to cooperate fully with the authorities." Ridge let out an animalistic sound of despair. "You bitch! You set me up!" he roared, lunging toward her, only to be yanked back forcefully by the police officers. "Take them both in," the lead agent ordered. As they dragged Ridge past me, his eyes met mine. He expected to see a weeping, hysterical wife. He expected to see the naive heiress he thought he had so easily manipulated. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. I let the mask drop completely. I looked at him with eyes as cold and flat as the ones he had given me, as I lay dying on my penthouse floor in another lifetime. The corners of my mouth curled into a sharp, victorious smile. I tilted my glass toward him in a silent toast. In that split second, as the camera flashes exploded around us, I saw the exact moment Ridge realized the truth. He saw the cold calculation in my posture. He saw the orchestrator of his absolute destruction. He realized that the trap hadn't been set by the IRS or by Cherish. It had been set by the wife he thought was a fool. "Maddie," he breathed, the realization horrifying him more than the handcuffs. You knew. "Enjoy your new life, Ridge," I whispered, so softly that only he could hear it over the clamor. "I certainly will." I watched them march him out the double doors, a broken, ruined man, destined for a concrete cell. Cherish followed, flanked by agents, her future utterly decimated by the evidence she had just handed over. They had destroyed each other, just as I designed. The ballroom was in absolute chaos, a symphony of shouting reporters and panicked board members. My father rushed over to me, wrapping me in a protective embrace, apologizing profusely for bringing a monster into our lives. I hugged him back, feeling the strong, steady beat of his healthy heart. I looked up at the crystal chandelier, the light catching the diamond ring on my finger. I would file for an annulment in the morning. I had saved my family, my company, and my own life. The ghost of the girl who died on that cold floor was finally at peace. The game was over, and the heiress took all. If this story of ultimate revenge and calculated betrayal kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Have you ever had to deal with a toxic betrayal? Or would you have handled Ridge differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to share this wild story with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic, real-life twists and storytelling that will leave you breathless. See you in the next video.